Chair recognizes Ms. Balint from Vermont for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here, Mr. Dodaro. Appreciate your time. The Postal Service is a lifeline for rural communities like mine in Vermont. My neighbors in Vermont rely on Postal Service for essentials like medication and for many folks who run small businesses, out of their homes. And the continued viability of the Postal Service, especially in rural parts of this country, is one of my top priorities. Now, thanks to leadership on this committee, including our chairman, Mr. Comer, and former chair, Carolyn Maloney, the Postal Service Reform Act of 2022 was actually a really great bipartisan success story of the last Congress. And I want to dive in a little bit more on the Postal Service. Mr. Dodaro, how long has the Postal Service been on the high-risk list?
The most recent, I think, was 2009 we added it. Actually, if you go back in time, we added it a long time ago. I'll get you the specific date, but then we took them off after some congressional action, but then they deteriorated further. I remember because I actually was called by the Postmaster General at the time, and I was acting Comptroller General at that time, and he actually asked us to consider putting him back on the list.
Yeah.
And we did. We made our own independent judgment.
And Mr. Dodaro, how did the Postal Service Reform Act in 2022 contribute to the significant progress in the high-risk area, so that we can understand that a little bit better?
Yeah, well, it eliminated the requirement for pre-funding health care benefits, and it forgave the amount of money that they owed to that fund in that area. It also shifted some of the responsibilities to the Medicare program, so that it was mostly in the healthcare area. So, but there are a lot of things that down the road it didn't deal with that are going to need to be dealt with. For example, the healthcare benefits issue around the 2030 time frames, that fund's going to run out of money because there's no pre-funding into it. So at that point, the Postal Service is trying to estimate what it would cost to pay out of their operating revenue, which would be about $5 billion a year. I mean, they're already losing money. So they're not going to be able to deal with that. I mean, the first-class mail has been declining. It's not expected to turn around. Packages, the competition there is keen. And coming out of the pandemic, the package revenue is going down. Now, the only revenue increase is due to the tax, or the increases in the price of postage. So they have problems. They're still in debt in a number of areas. So the basic business model isn't sound going forward in the future. Congress gave it some life for a period of time, but the underlying problem is still there and needs to be dealt with. I'll ask Mr. Trimble if he has any additional comments.
No, I think that covers the main points. I think just in terms of the longer-term challenges that they face, currently their long-term liabilities and debt is over $144 billion. And they're projected to lose in fiscal 23 about $4.5 billion. And so when the health benefit fund runs out, if you're already running a deficit of $4.5 billion, you have to add another $5 billion on top of that. You can see the challenges that they're currently facing.
Well, I appreciate that. One of the things that I always say about Vermont is that we run on duct tape, twine, and hundreds of hours of volunteer time, from Vermonters across the state. And we are cheap by nature. We're thrifty. And I just want to convey that there are lots of rural communities, just like the one that I live in, Vermont, that depend on the Postal Service for their very survival. And so I certainly understand the concerns about how the business model is not working. And we made progress, I think, by my count, more than $1 billion in financial benefits came to taxpayers since 2006 because of progress in the high-risk areas. And I appreciate that as a thrifty Vermonter. But I just want to plant a flag in the ground and say we cannot let the Postal Service die on the vine. Rural America is depending on us
Yeah,
to
no,
figure this out.
I understand that. I understand that. And, you know, my motto at GAO is elegant but cheap. And
like
so,
it.
But we also, like any Vermonters who want to come to work at GAO, it's a good place to practice their thriftiness. But also, the fundamental issue here, you know, if you look back in history, Postal Service was a government entity
Yes.
in the beginning. And then somebody said, oh, well, we can do better than having a private sector model in this area. And it worked well until it didn't.
Right.
And so I think Congress is going to have to come to grips with what model do we want to have if we want to guarantee level of service to the American people, and who's going to pay for it.
Yeah.
And that is the decision down the road that's inevitable in this case. And what we're saying is the sooner Congress deals with that issue, the better.
Agreed. Last comment, just, you know, we did great work in a bipartisan manner on this issue in the past. I want to continue to work on this. It is really not an overstatement to say that rural America depends on the Postal Service. It's a critical infrastructure, and we got to come together. We got to continue to come together in a bipartisan manner on this issue. Thank you.
I agree.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Before I yield to Mr. Sessions, I would like to point out, I spoke with Postmaster General DeJoy last night, and we hope to bring him in front of at least subcommittee hearing within the next month or so, maybe 2 months, whatever the calendar will permit. So I think that's a very good point that you all discussed, and it's something that this committee has legislative jurisdiction on. We're going to have to take very seriously. We passed the bipartisan legislation, but there's still things I think that need to be done. So I appreciate that.